SNAP checks just got cut in half. Millions of Americans woke up this month to find their benefits slashed. No notice, no explanation, just less. One single mother told a reporter, "I went to buy milk and cereal, and my balance was down by 50%. That wasn't a glitch, that was policy. And if you think this doesn't affect you, think again. Because when a government starts cutting food aid in silence, it says something far bigger. It says the system's breaking from the inside." 42 million Americans depend on SNAP, the program once called food stamps. It feeds families, seniors, veterans, the backbone of this country. And now, they're watching that lifeline shrink right before their eyes. So how did this happen? How does the world's richest nation suddenly tell millions of people there's just not enough left to eat? And maybe the harder question is, if it can happen once, what's stopping it from happening again? This isn't about politics. This is about survival, and about a quiet warning that every American should be paying attention to. Because when the grocery lines grow longer and the trust gets thinner, it's not just the poor who feel it. It's the whole system that starts to crack. In this episode, we're not doing headlines. We're going beneath them. We'll unpack why the SNAP checks were cut, what really happened in Washington, and how this moment could shape the future of America's safety net. I'm going to show you something the news won't. The human stories, the political moves behind closed doors, and what's really at stake when the government says temporary, but families here forgotten. So stay with me, because this isn't just about missing food stamps. It's about a nation testing how far it can push its people before something breaks. Let's start with the basics, because to understand why this moment matters, you have to understand what SNAP really is. SNAP isn't some handout program. It's America's promise that no one should go hungry just because they're poor, old, or out of work. It's the nation's largest food assistance program, a quiet lifeline that feeds more than 42 million people every single month. It began during the Great Depression, when the country watched its own citizens starve in the middle of abundance. The idea was simple. If you work, if you contribute, you deserve at least enough to eat. Over time, it became digital. No paper coupons, just a card like any debit card. But behind every swipe at the grocery store, there's a story. A veteran stretching his benefits to last until the end of the month. A grandmother raising 2 grandkids after her daughter passed away. A single mum buying milk, bread, and fruit, calculating in her head how many days that balance will last. For them, SNAP isn't about politics. It's survival. It's dignity. It's the difference between worrying about rent and worrying about hunger. And here's the truth. Most people on SNAP are working. They're stocking shelves, delivering packages, cleaning offices, real jobs, long hours, low pay. SNAP fills the gap that wages don't cover. But over the years, the program has become a political battlefield. Some call it wasteful. Others call it essential. Yet the numbers don't lie. Every single dollar in SNAP generates about $1.50 in economic activity. Grocery stores depend on it. Small towns depend on it. The entire food economy depends on it. When those checks stop flowing, it's not just families who feel it. It's farmers, retailers, and truck drivers too. And that's what makes this latest cut so dangerous. SNAP isn't a side program. It's part of the nation's foundation. You can feel its pulse in every checkout line across America. But lately, something's been changing. Prices keep rising, wages barely move, and benefits can't keep up. The average monthly SNAP benefit today barely covers 2 weeks of groceries. 2 weeks. The rest of the month, people improvise. They skip meals. They visit food pantries. They pray the next deposit comes on time. So when that deposit suddenly drops by half, it's not just a math problem. It's a gut punch. It's panic. It's parents asking, "What do I feed my kids tomorrow?" It's seniors cutting pills in half to afford dinner. It's the quiet kind of suffering that rarely makes headlines, but defines what millions live through every single day. That's why this story matters. Because SNAP isn't just an economic safety net. It's a moral one. It's the thread that says America still cares, that we still see one another. And if that thread snaps, we lose more than a program. we lose a piece of who we are. So how did this happen now? Why were payments suddenly cut in half, and who made that decision? In a moment, we'll pull back the curtain on what really went down in Washington, and why millions of families woke up to find less on their cards with no one taking responsibility. So here's where things start to unravel. In early November 2025, millions of Americans across at least 15 states noticed the same thing. Their SNAP deposits were smaller, delayed, or in some cases didn't show up at all. For many, it was half of what they normally received. Half. And the explanations when they came were confusing, bureaucratic, and buried under political language. Temporary adjustment, funding transition, emergency measure. But the truth was far simpler and far uglier. Washington had reached another deadlock. A government shutdown over budget negotiations froze key funding for programs like SNAP. And while lawmakers argued about numbers, real people were standing in grocery aisles staring at declined cards. The Trump administration released a statement saying they would partially fund November SNAP benefits using emergency reserves. That's what caused the 50% drop. It wasn't a glitch, it was a decision. In states like Texas and Pennsylvania, food banks started filling up within days. People who had never asked for help before were suddenly lining up at 6 a.m., hoping to get bread and canned goods. A volunteer in Dallas told me, you could see the fear in their eyes. It wasn't just about missing food, it was about losing control. Behind closed doors, the politics were brutal. Democrats pushed for a full funding bill. Senate Republicans struck it down. The administration said partial benefits were better than none, but millions disagreed. For them, half a meal isn't better than starving. It's just a slower version of the same thing. What makes this moment different from past shutdowns is how sudden and quiet it was. No major announcement, no warning letters. Just smaller payments showing up in bank accounts. And when you live paycheck to paycheck, or benefit to benefit, even a small delay can trigger a full-blown crisis. Rent gets missed, utility bills go unpaid, children go to school hungry. Economically, it was a domino effect. Grocery stores in low-income areas saw sales drop by 30% overnight. Small-town markets had to throw away unsold produce. Truck deliveries slowed because demand collapsed. And when demand collapses, workers lose hours. So a funding cut meant fewer paychecks. And the cycle kept feeding itself. But beyond economics, there's something deeper here. The quiet erosion of trust. When citizens can no longer rely on the system that's supposed to feed them, it breeds a kind of hopelessness that doesn't just vanish when funding returns. People start to believe they're on their own. They stop voting. They stop believing anything will change. And that's how democracies decay. Not through chaos, but through exhaustion. By the end of November, the government promised to restore full payments soon. But for the millions who already skipped meals, that phrase sounded hollow. Soon doesn't fill a stomach. Soon doesn't feed a child tonight. This is where we are. The largest food assistance program in America, balanced on the edge of politics. A system meant to keep people alive, now used as leverage in a power struggle. So the next question is, why does this keep happening? Why does the country that can fund wars and corporate bailouts still stumble when it comes to feeding its own? The answer, as you'll see next, isn't just about budgets. It's about priorities and what we choose to value when the money runs thin. When a system this massive suddenly breaks, it's never just one cause. It's layers of neglect, politics and math colliding all at once. The SNAP crisis of 2025 didn't happen overnight. It was years in the making. Let's start with the first piece, political gridlock. Every year, Congress has to approve funding for the Department of Agriculture, the agency that manages SNAP. But lately, the fight over federal spending has turned into a game of political chicken. One side wants to cut social programs to reduce the deficit. The other argues that cutting food assistance in the middle of record inflation is morally bankrupt. And caught in the middle are 42 million Americans who just need to eat. Shutdowns used to be rare. Now they're strategy. And every time Washington stalls, programs like SNAP are the first to suffer. It's easy to freeze funds that don't belong to lobbyists or defense contractors, because the poor don't have lobbyists. They have voices, but no power behind them. The second reason is economic pressure. Prices of basic groceries have jumped nearly 25% since the pandemic. Eggs, milk, fruit, meat, they've all gone up, while SNAP benefits haven't kept pace. The average benefit covers barely 2 weeks of food. So even when payments are normal, families are already in survival mode. When those checks are cut in half, there's no margin left to absorb the shock. Then there's administrative fragility, something most Americans never think about. SNAP payments are routed through a web of state agencies, vendors, and databases that require constant coordination. It's an old system. A delay in one department can ripple nationwide. When the funding freeze hit, states couldn't process full payments fast enough. The infrastructure itself buckled under political indecision. But behind all this technical language lies a moral problem, one that's harder to talk about. Somewhere along the way, America stopped seeing hunger as an emergency. We normalized it. Food insecurity became background noise. Politicians talk about it when the cameras are on, then move on to the next crisis. And that's the danger, because systems don't collapse when no one notices. They collapse when everyone stops caring. Think about this. SNAP costs roughly 1/10 of what the US spends on defense every year. 1/10. Yet when the budget gets tight, it's always the food programs, the healthcare funds, the housing grants that get put on hold. It's not about scarcity. It's about priorities. I once spoke to a policy analyst who said, "We always find money for bombs, but we never find enough for bread." That line stayed with me, because it sums up exactly where America stands right now. A country that can afford almost anything, except compassion at scale. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This crisis wasn't a malfunction. It was a message. It showed how fragile our safety nets have become, and how quickly they can be used as bargaining chips in political negotiations. SNAP didn't fail because the math stopped working. It failed because empathy stopped mattering. So now that we've seen how we got here, the real question becomes, what happens next? Because beyond the policies and the numbers are real people, living through the fallout right now. In the next section, we'll step into their world and see what this looks like not on paper, but in real life. If you really want to understand what this crisis feels like, you have to leave Washington and step into the homes of the people living it. Because behind every policy and every percentage point, there's a face, a name, and a dinner table that suddenly looks emptier than it used to. In Ohio, there's a mother of 3 named Lisa. She works nights at a nursing home, cleaning rooms for barely $14 an hour. Her SNAP benefit used to cover half her groceries. When the cut hit, it covered maybe a third. She told me, "I used to make spaghetti with ground beef. Now I make it with beans. It's cheaper, but the kids ask why it tastes different." She didn't have the heart to tell them the truth. The government decided beans were the new beef. Then there's Harold, a 71-year-old veteran in Arizona. He worked construction for 40 years, broke his back twice, and now lives off a small pension and SNAP. His payment dropped from $180 to $90. He said, "I keep my meals simple. Oatmeal in the morning, soup at night. If I get hungry, I drink water." When I asked what he thought of the politicians arguing in DC, he laughed softly and said, "They don't argue when it's their paychecks on the line." In Pennsylvania, a grocery store owner named Miguel told me sales dropped 30% in 1 week. He said, "People don't buy meat anymore. They buy rice and bread. I used to stock fresh produce every morning. Now half of it goes bad." SNAP cuts didn't just hurt the people using the cards. They rippled through entire neighborhoods. The cashiers, the truck drivers, the local farmers. And then there's the unseen toll, the emotional one. Teachers in low-income schools are seeing more kids show up hungry. Food banks report families crying in line. Volunteers tell stories of seniors too ashamed to ask for help. One worker in Dallas said, "They don't say much. They just keep thanking us." That's the part that breaks you. They're grateful for something they should already have. These are the stories that rarely make the evening news because they don't fit neatly into a headline. But they are the real state of the union. This is America. Not in the statistics, but in the quiet, unfiltered lives of its people. And what's haunting is how normal all of this has become. We scroll past videos of people skipping meals. We shake our heads at rising prices, and then we move on. But hunger doesn't move on. It lingers. It builds. It shapes how people see their country and themselves. Lisa told me something that stayed with me. When my card got cut, it wasn't just the food. It was like the country was saying, "You don't matter as much anymore." That's what's at stake here. Not just nutrition, but dignity. The feeling that your work, your effort, your existence still count for something. This is the part of the story that spreadsheets can't measure. The pain of having to explain to a child why there's less food on the plate. The guilt of choosing between groceries and gas. The quiet shame that keeps people silent even as they're drowning. And maybe that's the hardest truth of all. Hunger in America isn't loud. It's quiet. It whispers through kitchen walls and empty lunchboxes. It doesn't scream. It fades. And if we don't listen, it disappears completely from view. So what happens if nothing changes? What if this temporary cut becomes the new normal? That's where we're headed next, into the possible future of America's food system and what that means for every single one of us. Let's talk about what happens next, because if nothing changes, the story doesn't just end here. The truth is, the SNAP crisis of 2025 isn't just a one-time cut. It's a signal, a preview of what America could look like in the years ahead if we keep ignoring the cracks in our social foundation. In the short term, the damage is already spreading. Food banks across the country are overwhelmed. Volunteers can't keep up. Shelves that used to stay stocked all week are empty by Tuesday. And it's not just urban centers anymore. Rural America, the towns that depend on small grocery stores and community aid, are being hit even harder. When SNAP checks shrink, those stores lose customers. When the stores close, so do the jobs. That's how a program meant to fight poverty ends up deepening it. Then there's the health impact. Hunger doesn't just mean empty stomachs. It means higher blood pressure, slower recovery, weaker immune systems. Doctors across the Midwest report seeing more malnutrition in seniors, more diabetic patients skipping meals to stretch insulin. You can trace the line directly. Fewer SNAP dollars mean more hospital visits, more healthcare costs, and eventually, more taxpayer money spent cleaning up the mess that a small prevention could have avoided. And beyond all of that is the erosion of something less visible, but far more dangerous: trust. When people can't rely on the government to keep its most basic promises, they start to withdraw from the system entirely. They vote less. They participate less. They believe less. That's how democracies fade. Not with a bang, but with quiet disillusionment. Economically, the ripple is enormous. SNAP injects billions into local economies every year. For every dollar spent, $1.50 circulates back into the economy through grocers, farmers, and distributors. Cutting it doesn't just hurt recipients. It slows the flow of money through the places that need it most. And once those communities start shrinking, rebuilding them takes decades. Now imagine this continuing for another year, another shutdown, another temporary cut. What happens when temporary becomes normal? You'll start seeing second-generation hunger. Children who grow up thinking food insecurity is just part of life. You'll see more elderly people forced to choose between heating and eating. You'll see the American dream shrink into survival math. How many meals can I skip before payday? And here's the paradox. SNAP is one of the most efficient government programs ever built. Less than 10 cents of every dollar goes to administration. The rest feeds people. There's no fraud epidemic. There's no waste crisis. The system works until politics breaks it. But maybe the scariest part is the moral drift. Each time we allow hunger to increase without outrage, it moves the goalpost of what we think is acceptable. The idea of a nation where some go hungry while others waste becomes normal. And once it becomes normal, it's almost impossible to reverse. So, What can be done? The solutions aren't complicated, but they require courage. Fully fund the program. Adjust benefits to match real food prices. Protect it from shutdown politics. These aren't radical ideas. They're common sense. But it starts with awareness, with refusing to accept temporary as good enough. Because when 42 million people depend on a system to eat, temporary failure isn't temporary at all. It's generational. And maybe that's the question we all need to ask ourselves. When history looks back on this moment, will it say we fixed the system, or that we looked away while it quietly collapsed? So here we are. Another month, another crisis that shouldn't have happened. A program built to feed 42 million people reduced to a political bargaining chip. Families rationing groceries while lawmakers argue over numbers that will never touch their own dinner tables. It's frustrating. It's exhausting. And yet, it's the reality millions of Americans are living through right now. But here's the thing. This story doesn't have to end here. The SNAP crisis isn't proof that the system is hopeless. It's proof that people are still paying attention. Every time someone speaks out, volunteers, donates, or simply refuses to look away, the idea of a compassionate America flickers back to life. Because empathy isn't gone. It's just waiting to be heard louder than the noise of politics. I've been studying social policy for 2 decades, and I've learned one unshakable truth. Hunger is not inevitable. It's a choice, not by the people who suffer from it, but by the society that allows it to continue. We can build new highways, send rockets into space, and fund endless wars. But feeding our own citizens somehow becomes too complicated. It's not. It just requires the will to care. If you're watching this and you rely on SNAP, or someone you love does, know this. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. And you are not to blame. The system may be broken, but your worth isn't. Keep speaking up. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding answers from those who make the decisions that shape your life. And if you're someone who's never needed SNAP, I have a different ask for you. Don't tune out. Don't fall for the myth that this is someone else's problem. The strength of a country isn't measured by its GDP. It's measured by how it treats the people with the least. You don't need to be in Congress to make a difference. You can donate to your local food bank. You can support policies that protect essential programs. You can vote for leaders who believe that dignity should never depend on income. Because the truth is, hunger anywhere in America weakens everyone. It eats away at the fabric of who we are, one empty fridge at a time. And rebuilding that trust, that basic promise, starts with all of us choosing to care again. So, here's my final thought. The SNAP cuts were never just about money. They were about values, about whether we still believe that everyone deserves enough to eat, not as charity, but as a right. That's the America I still believe in, the one that looks out for its neighbors, that builds people up instead of breaking them down. And maybe the next time you hear about budget debates or funding freezes, you'll remember this moment, the people behind those words, and what it really means when a government forgets to feed its own. Tell me what you think in the comments. Do you believe the SNAP program should be protected or reformed? Have you seen the impact of these cuts in your community? Let's make this conversation bigger than one episode, because change doesn't start in Congress. It starts here, with awareness, with compassion, with us. And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this. In a country as rich and capable as America, no one should have to choose between dignity and dinner.